All right, good morning, everybody. We're gonna kick off this webinar this morning, and I'd like to introduce you to Peter Smales. Peter, are you there?
I am. Connie, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you for that introduction, Connie. My name is Pete Smales. I'm the CMO of Rancher Labs, and right off the bat, I can tell you this is going to be an event unlike any other. If you guys were seeing the video there, that was great to see a couple of our presenters getting the family involved in the presentation. I can think of no better way to kick off a session than getting the kids involved. Appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy schedules. We're certainly, as a collective, living in very unique and interesting times, and so a lot on people's minds, and really appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy days to spend some time with us. Topic for today, we're here to talk about Kubernetes. Specifically, the title of our event today is How to Harness Kubernetes from Cloud to Edge. Kubernetes has certainly rapidly emerged as a key strategic initiative for just about all organizations, and it's proving itself to be a truly transformational technology in enabling organizations to really drive computing everywhere. And so what we wanted to do today was, there's a lot of information out there, so what we wanted to do today was provide some expert insight and thought and guidance and direction really on the state of Kubernetes and things, where it's going, why it's important, how people are being successful with it, and then provide some insights and guidance on things you want to be thinking about as you are strategizing and thinking through what your overall Kubernetes strategy is going to be. So we've got a full agenda, so we'll keep things moving right along. I'm joined by a number of distinguished colleagues, so we'll do some brief introductions and sort of walk through our agenda. I want to start things off with, start at the top. And so we've got Dave Bartoletti, who is VP and Principal Analyst with Forrester, who's going to spend some time talking about Kubernetes, what's happening in the market, how it's evolving, what are the key use cases, and just provide that overall insight. So Dave, appreciate you joining. Wanted to say a quick hi.
Thanks everyone for joining. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, sir. Audio sounds good. So after Dave, then we're going to shift gears, and I'm going to be joined by Shen Liang, who's our Rancher's co-founder and CEO. And Shen and I are going to spend some time really providing insight on Rancher. Who is Rancher? Some of you may not be familiar with who we are. So what's our vision? What's our strategy? What our solutions look like? And provide you some insights from that perspective. So Shen, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Great. And then the real fun part is we'll shift gears and provide you with a number of customer perspectives. So we're joined by Thomas Ornell from ABAX. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
And we're also joined by Zach Dunn with Optoro. Hey, Zach, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Excellent. And what we'll do there is we've got a few slides, and then we've just got some banter, and really, Thomas and Zach can provide their thoughts on their journey to Kubernetes, the challenges that they were facing, how they addressed them, and some of the benefits that they've seen from doing that. Really should be valuable insight there. And then we'll close with some thoughts on comparing Kubernetes management approaches. The market has certainly become very has heated up considerably. There are many different perspectives, and so it's important to get a clear sense of there's a very clear picture of sort of emerging strategies around how you manage Kubernetes. So we'll give you our thoughts on that front. Should be super fun. We're going to try and do this all said and done within about 90 minutes. A couple of housekeeping things before I turn it over to Dave. We are recording the session today. We will provide that recording to folks that attended afterwards. We are also, we've got folks monitoring the chat. So if you do have questions, feel free to submit them into the chat, and we will be answering questions as we go through the chat, and then as well for questions we don't get answered, we'll provide answers to those after the fact. And finally, just on sort of a lighter note, appreciate again everyone taking the time. We are literally running this from everyone's remote locations, so apologies in advance for any technical snafus or disconnects or anything like that. Appreciate everyone's patience, but so far so good, and I'm not going to jinx it, so I will turn things over to Dave. Bear with me one sec, and okay, Dave, ball is coming your way.
Hi everyone. Thanks again for joining. My name is Dave Bartoletti. I'm a principal analyst at Forrester, and I'm also a VP on our team and lead up our cloud computing playbook team. My main research focus areas are public cloud platforms, cloud native development platforms and tools, and primarily helping enterprises accelerate their digital transformations using the full range of cloud technologies. I'm really glad the Rancher team asked me to join them today because I love to talk about the current state of containers and Kubernetes in the enterprise, and I've got a whole bunch of new data to share with you today, which is timely and is going to be kicking off a lot of new research streams for Forrester. I want to state the current state of our cloud native and container research, and especially how containers and Kubernetes are really powering digital transformation at scale. That's the takeaway. So let's step back and look at the big picture. Why are we doing all of this? Cloud and cloud native especially are really the engines powering a new, more connected economy now. The big picture is that cloud is powering the development of a new hyper-connected economy. Especially look at what we're doing today, hyper-connected presentations. Leading companies really prioritize speed and innovation today above cost savings and efficiency. Right? To put it simply, no one's going to dominate their industry by running the most efficient data centers. The fastest companies we work with are actively trying to create these connected cloud ecosystems by putting their customers at the center. But how do we do that? How do we connect to customers earlier in our product design process? How do we get them earlier in our software development process? And how do we get their feedback constantly during testing cycles for new applications and products? By rethinking how we build and run apps. Right? At the micro level, we're rethinking and how we design apps. But at the macro level, we're thinking about how we're redesigning business processes. Right? The microservices approach to chopping up applications into small bits and distributing them is really being mirrored now at the business process level. We no longer fit applications into infrastructure. We consume the best infrastructure on demand to support our apps. So apps are really the tail wagging this cloudy dog moving forward. There we go. Looking at what cloud means today, it's really become shorthand for modern. It's more than a set of as-a-service categories offered from different deployment models. It's really describing the set of connected changes that are happening. Everything about applications is changing at once. How we design them, how we build them, and how we deploy and run them. As companies start to tear apart monoliths and build new apps as collections of microservices and functions, they rethink architecture. They're also driving friction out of development processes, right? With DevOps and CI/CD pipeline tools and incredible amounts of automation in our software delivery pipelines. And we've never had more options for deployment, right? From on-prem physical and virtual infrastructure to hosted private clouds to containers. And modern infrastructure is really highly automated. As we shift to infrastructure as code and site reliability engineering concepts and tools, this is a lot of change to take on at once, right? To tell an enterprise development team, just change everything about your apps at the same time, right? How you design them, how you build them, and how you deploy them. It's sort of like changing the chassis and the engine of a car while you're driving it and moving the steering wheel to the other side. So this is a big challenge for enterprises to try to align these changes. The reason that containers and Kubernetes and microservices have exploded in popularity in just the past 3 to 4 years is because they help companies create virtuous circles here, where a little bit of progress in one or two of these dimensions makes progress in the others safer, easier, and faster. You can do DevOps without containers, but you'll be writing a lot of automations yourself. You can deploy containers into VMs, but you might not need all that overhead. So really today, cloud and cloud native tools and platforms, and especially containers and Kubernetes, are sort of at the heart of this three-dimensional application change. Hitting the wrong key, sorry. So all of this application-driven transformation that's going on has driven public cloud adoption into hypergrowth for the past 6 years. It's the first time this chart has looked like this. Let me explain what's going on. These are adoption rates. Right? The number of North American enterprises who are actively running production workloads on public cloud platforms. This isn't SaaS adoption. This is infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So the bars on the right show that we're really starting to level off in terms of after really a sustained period of hypergrowth. In 2013, so just 6.5 years ago, public cloud adoption in North American enterprises was 10%. A lot of people don't really believe that. Cloud's been around for 15 years. Right, there was a long tail of experimentation before public cloud adoption really exploded. Then it grew 5 times from 2013 to 2017. Now it's starting to level off. It's going to be 70% in 2020. But notice that private cloud investment and adoption, while it's leveling off too, is just as high as public cloud adoption. Cloud did not kill the data center. It made us rethink what the data center is. And so these private and hosted private clouds aren't your older brother or older sister's private clouds. It's not about building a better infrastructure as a service than you can find in the public cloud. It's about offering developers a cloud-native development experience behind the firewall. So these are true private clouds that we're starting to build now. And a lot of enterprises are converting their existing infrastructure as a service private clouds into true development platforms and looking for container and cloud-native solutions to lay on top of them to give development teams that same self-service and cloud-native experience they can find in the public cloud. But this is adoption rates, right? Only a very small portion. It's well under 20% in most enterprises. It's more around 10 to 12% actually, of enterprise applications have moved to either public or private cloud platforms. So from a workload standpoint, we really are truly just getting started. Let's look at public cloud adoption and container adoption on sort of a classic tech adoption S-curve. And I'm not force-fitting the data into an S-curve. It naturally is fitting an S-curve. It's clear that we're sort of exiting the rapid expansion phase for public cloud and just entering the optimization phase, while we are square in the middle of the rapid expansion phase for containers and Kubernetes, which is right around 30% adoption now, while you see public cloud is up at that 67% that we saw on the last slide. We could draw a third S-curve that's coming along right behind this for serverless and functions as a service. And it's lagging container adoption by about 3 to 4 years, just like container and Kubernetes adoption is lagging overall public cloud adoption by 3 or 4 years. The other thing that's happening is that the S-curves are getting a little steeper with new technologies, right? Container adoption is actually growing faster than public cloud adoption did, and we expect serverless to grow faster as well. And that's because of the impact of public cloud and open source. And I'll get into more of that later. So we really expect container adoption to hit public cloud levels by about 2024, or even earlier. Why is that? Because that S-curve for containers is really accelerated by cloud adoption. It's the combination of ubiquitous cloud platforms and open source that's kicking container and Kubernetes adoption into high gear. Public cloud accelerates container adoption because companies can try out containers on demand immediately in a public cloud platform. In prior years, if we're talking about virtualization adoption, you had to lay down a virtualization framework, pay for it, pay a lot for it, and then get it working before you started rapidly expanding it. Not anymore. And since the container market is powered by open source, everyone, both consumers and vendors, can start innovating more rapidly on a core open source foundation at much lower cost. So at this phase of adoption, we start to see an increase in Forrester client inquiries around consistency. Really, it's just as things start growing very quickly that we start getting the questions on the right. How are we going to manage a rapidly expanding set of clusters while ensuring that our developers get a consistent experience? And how do we get cross-cluster visibility? How do we enforce usage and security policies everywhere? And how do we add yet another cluster in yet another place for the next innovation project we're kicking off and do it safely? So we're just at the beginning of these questions, and that sort of also tells us that we're really in rapid expansion. So that's the platform view. We can also look at some data around development teams. Developers are still wild about containers and Kubernetes, and it's not slowing down. Container-related inquiries to Forrester more than doubled in 2019 over 2018. I used to joke in 2017, I just answered the phone. Thanks for calling Forrester. The answer is Docker. What's your question? And now, of course, we just shift that to say the answer is Kubernetes. What's your question, please? But the volume of inquiries is exploding. A whopping 61% of enterprise developers have used containers somewhere in their app dev pipelines already. And 53% have already used a native public cloud container service for something, dev and test or production deployment. Both of those last two numbers have doubled since 2016. So that's just over 3 years. But again, I really think we're just getting started. Remember, this is the enterprise view. We're not taking a Silicon Valley cloud native view here. These are enterprise companies taking advantage of this. At the executive strategy level, implementing or expanding our use of containers is now a top 5 infrastructure priority as well. The top infrastructure priority for the past 3 years has been to expand our use of cloud technologies, the big picture cloud, to drive digital innovation. This is the first year that containers themselves have made it into the top 5. And this makes sense when every infrastructure vendor, every virtualization vendor, every operating system vendor is adding container support. Oh, 32% companies now have containers on their critical priority list. That's really high, but look at the moderate priority list. There's virtually 9 out of 10 companies have containers somewhere on their priority list. So this is going to really drive the conversation through 2020 and 2021. So now we can look at how adoption is looking. That 30% number I showed you on the last slide for container adoption, here's how it's growing. Detailed adoption data for containers and Kubernetes use. So these are the companies using container platforms to either develop and deploy new apps or to host or modernize existing apps. So there's that 30% in 2020, and we're looking at 54% growth just between 2019 when we collected this data in 2021. And what's been interesting in this market as well is in the earlier days of asking people to estimate how much of the new technology that they would consume, they always overestimated how much they were going to use 2 years later or 3 years later. What we've seen over the past 5 years is that people are giving us really good data. The adoption numbers that they're forecasting are the adoption numbers they're meeting. So I think the 54% growth in container adoption through 2021 is solid, and it might even be higher than that. So for the last data dump I'll lay on you, we asked how companies consume containers today. So what kind of infrastructure powers the containers that they build and deploy? And this is for all kinds of apps. Again, both new projects and modernizing existing apps. So what you can see is that multi-cloud is already the norm. It was in 2018, and it stayed the same in 2019. So what this data says is roughly equal amounts of companies build their own container infrastructure service from open source bits, or using a container or Kubernetes as a service platform. Equal number use a container service natively in a public cloud, and an equal number use containers within a curated platform as a service, either on-prem or in the public cloud. As I said, this has been consistent since we started asking this question 3 years ago, but so what does it mean? Right? It means in the race to innovate, companies are building platforms, consuming containers in the cloud, and using containers in a PaaS, and very often 2 or 3 of those in the same enterprise. In fact, 60% of respondents to this chose 2 or more deployment types. So it really is a multi-cloud container world already. And now we're at the point where we're asking the question, who's going to manage it? Today, the primary use cases we see for containers and Kubernetes are building new, mostly stateless, cloud-native apps. And when you're doing this, what companies are asking about is how do I get speed, development speed and consistency, and scale. Simple scaling up and down depending on the use case. They're also using containers to drive up infrastructure efficiency, maybe drive down some virtualization overhead, and leverage bare metal where it's needed. Virtually every large enterprise company customer, especially in financial services and insurance that I'm talking to, is looking at containers now for rehosting, for infrastructure efficiency, to rethink how much of a virtualization substrate they need. And finally, repackaging, rehosting, or refactoring existing monoliths, which are mostly stateful and a lot more complex. Right, so here's why, another reason why that multi-cloud data is so strong. This could easily represent 3 projects in the same enterprise, and often does. The larger companies we're talking to are using different types of approaches to container platforms for developing new, rehosting old, and driving up efficiency. I guess going. Really, what's on the horizon? Sorry. We're also starting to see some new and emerging types of use cases expand quickly. Companies are looking to container platforms to manage clusters on bare metal, to simplify and scale their AI and machine learning workloads. We're also seeing an explosion in just the last 6 months in interest in distributed edge computing apps. And what that means is, how do I run hundreds or thousands of small clusters on edge compute devices or edge compute networks? And really, a third significant trend that we're tracking closely in Forrester with this long stream of research this year is companies using container platforms to incrementally modernize even their oldest, cruftiest legacy core business apps. In fact, when we ask companies, what's the first step you took to modernize a core business app? More and more the answer we hear is, we first tried to detach it from an aging platform by getting it into a container, or part of it into a container. Once we did that, we can try making little changes. We can try seeing if we can apply DevOps automated release pipelines to making changes to even our oldest apps that we haven't upgraded for 10 years. It was too risky to change anything before that. So we're also moving into a situation where this isn't your mom or dad's lift and shift. Rehosting in a container platform, even an existing monolith, or a monolith broken up into a set of slightly smaller services, can open up so much portability and opportunity for operational efficiencies by using the benefits of highly distributed containerized infrastructure, that's often the first step to modernization. Right? So containers are becoming like that old BASF marketing tagline. Containers themselves don't do AI, machine learning, edge, or core modernization, but they make AI and edge and modernization a whole lot better. And really, edge computing is a particularly hot expansion market. I mean, it's obviously, if you track what's going on in the world, especially with the telcos and the push to 5G, with 5G on the horizon and the number of edge devices and the power of edge devices and edge networks expanding rapidly, we're not going to see this slow down. With better connectivity, and it's getting better, plus greater and greater device intelligence, we can go from single sensor to multiple sensor devices, and the potential for local, low latency computing now is exploding. Every company across industries is trying to find a way to leverage something about edge computing in the same way they're trying to leverage something about artificial intelligence to gain some new insight out of data. It's really what this is all about at the big picture. We're all rushing out to the edge now in the same way we rushed online and to the web to collect better information about every aspect of our business, whether it's how a machine is operating to what somebody's putting in their shopping cart. And really, the growth of edge computing is really tightly linked to and complementary to cloud computing. Just like cloud didn't kill the data center, virtual machine, and serverless won't kill containers, the edge won't kill the cloud. I mean, really, do we ever get rid of anything? Right? This debate that we love to have in the industry sometimes, at what point will cloud kill this? Or at what point will serverless kill that? Or at what point will containers kill this? Have we ever killed anything? We keep adding and augmenting. The concept of massively centralized cloud computing as an end state never made sense for all workloads or all enterprises. Right? When I said cloud is now shorthand for modern, it's also really shorthand for hyper-connected. The beauty of containers and Kubernetes is companies can now flexibly design and deploy more software components across central, distributed, and edge locations. It's back to that connected economy slide I used at the beginning. New tech doesn't replace existing tech as much as it extends and makes it hyper-connected. So I'll wrap up with a couple of slides taking a quick look at what we see as the state of the enterprise container platform market today. What does it look like? Well, you need to start with a consistent developer experience, either part of the platform or well integrated into it. And that's a strong self-service development experience to link containerized workloads and components and repos into CI/CD pipelines and strong dev tooling. A PaaS-like experience somehow has to be attached to all of our container platforms. And I'm using PaaS here not specifically to refer to a curated stack of components, but to the experience that developers expect. And that includes container application catalogs and repos. You need a way to integrate and update services like middleware, AI, database using some kind of repeatable application lifecycle automations. That's sort of in blue at the top, the developer experience and the application services you use to create container apps. At the infrastructure plane, you need a multi-cluster control plane and some set of cluster lifecycle management tools. These are all getting better across the board from every vendor in this space. And you need a strategy for deploying clusters to container-optimized compute, storage, and networks on whatever mix of cloud, on-prem, and edge locations you want. We're quickly entering a world, I think, where multi-cloud and hybrid, however you want to describe the multi-cloud experience moving forward, will be table stakes as much as Kubernetes itself is table stakes in container platforms at this point. And finally, don't leave out the most important people quite often in your transformation that we'd love to wait till bring in at the end so they can kill all of our projects and slow them down, but include security teams from the very beginning here. Let's learn from cloud. Let's learn from our early work in transformation, where the companies that accelerated the fastest thought about and implemented strong governance policies from day one for security and config, identity and access, compliance and audit, and full logging and monitoring of what's going on. You're not going to find all of these components perfectly integrated today from anyone, and that's okay. I'm not sure we want to go back to a gigantic suite view of all of this, but just know what you need to put together and constantly be on the lookout for innovative technology vendors that are providing components of this, and not just the largest suites. We're not really there yet, with everyone knowing exactly what needs to be in a giant suite. And finally, I pulled together just from the past 6 months, from our container inquiries and from some unpublished data we're collecting at this point on what are the real top Kubernetes adoption challenges that you should look for as you expand your use of containers. First is deploying clusters consistently across cloud platforms and at the edge. It's a constant inquiry topic. In fact, I think probably just in the past month, I've taken 6 to 7 direct inquiries from enterprises saying, is it time for us to get some control over the multiple Kubernetes clusters we have spreading out toward the organization, or is it too early, right? The question for people is, I want to lay consistency and operational controls without slowing anything down. We learned early on in the cloud adoption era not to overlay too much strong governance too early. So take a light touch to this, but look for consistent deployment, consistent monitoring and visibility for both app runtime and container runtime. Managing scale and expansion, and this is especially important if you're using containers for different workloads. Some might need a massive scale, something at the edge. Some don't need massive scale, long-lived, complex container platforms for rehosting traditional apps. Enforcing usage and security policies across the board, provisioning persistent storage is a constant inquiry request, and especially designing for portability. Let's not get into the same boat again, where we attach applications, like I said, too closely to the infrastructure platforms that they're deployed on. Companies need help continually designing for future portability. And with that, I'll turn it back over. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dave. Dave, you're going to turn it over to me?
I will. Oh, I have to go find you on this list. 1 second. Looks good.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar, and it's just fantastic to be able to follow Dave, because we've been following his advice for many years, and I think that really paid off. And it's great to see that all of you could benefit from his insight as well. So Rancher has been in business for over 5 years, and we've built a fantastic business. We are 100% open source business. We build open source software. We ship it to millions of developers and DevOps admins worldwide. There are tens of thousands of deployments within organizations out there, and we have hundreds of customers who put our software in mission-critical production. We've been recognized by all the leading analyst firms, including Dave's firm. We've stricken partnership with pretty much all the leading cloud providers, application providers, and infrastructure providers in the world. So we're very proud of what we've achieved. And this is, as all of us know, this is a very, very special time that we're heading into. There's a lot of uncertainty. And I was having a conversation with an industry leader a few days ago, and something he said that really struck me. Dave said earlier that we're in the era of digital transformation and IT agility, agile IT. And there's probably no other time than now that how important agile transformation is. And we're very, very proud of the role that we as an organization is playing in our industry. As David said, the reality is Kubernetes is everywhere, but Kubernetes everywhere is enabling agile IT. Kubernetes happens on developer desktop, it happens in data center, it happens in cloud, it happens in branch offices, and it happens on the edge. And there's one word that Dave used called consistency that appeared over and over again. You really can't be agile. Agile means fast, but if things are inconsistent, you spend a lot more time worrying about the infrastructure than worrying about your application and worrying about your business, and that's going to slow you down. It's been a long time since the industry is worried about incompatible operating systems or incompatible machines or incompatible programming frameworks. We put those things behind us. But really, without Kubernetes, your on-premise infrastructure and cloud infrastructure are not really consistent, let alone your developer laptop or branch offices. So this is a huge opportunity, and Rancher is the first company that I know of that started with a single-minded goal to solve this problem, to capture this opportunity. So wherever you have Kubernetes, Rancher is the management platform that ties everything together. We give a consistent experience to DevOps engineers. We provide IT admins with centralized visibility and control. And that's exactly what Rancher is about. That's the software we build, and that's why we've been so successful. I think from the very beginning, we've taken some pretty unique approaches in the Kubernetes market. It's been a vibrant and very, very interesting market. So I try to bucket some of the things that we do in 3 areas. And one area I can't really emphasize enough is our focus on being 100% open source. And we're very, very proud of it, and it's in our DNA. The way we do things, we absolutely don't hold any features back. What open source has really brought us is it allowed us to drive massive adoption. It significantly lowered the barrier for technology adoption. And I remember Bill Gates once said, when it was a long time ago, I went to his talks, he keeps saying software business is a volume business. And I really didn't understand it back then, because I was working for Sun and I thought we had much better software, much more advanced software, much more scalable software, much more enterprise grade software. But ultimately, it was the volume that actually determined enterprise grade success. So open source is really the new bar. I think all the companies or technologies have to cross today to actually gain massive adoption. And we've proven that a massively adopted piece of 100% open source software can actually drive an excellent business. We have hundreds, and that number is growing very, very quickly, quarter by quarter, that large enterprise customers who put our software in mission critical production, and they really have no problem paying for a enterprise subscription plan. And later on, you're going to talk to Thomas and Zach, a couple of our customers, and they can attest how much they enjoy working with open source software. Second thing I kind of like to emphasize about our unique approach is we're probably one of the first vendors, if not, probably still one of the very few vendors that formed the conviction that there's really nothing special about one vendor's Kubernetes versus the other vendor's Kubernetes. Now, Kubernetes can be differentiated, but at the end of the day, Kubernetes is a standard. It is like, like one analogy I kind of like to make is it's like TCP/IP. Imagine those NIC cards, those network interface cards, and everyone can make them, and some of them are better than others, but more or less they kind of do the same thing, right? And so we wholeheartedly embrace all the Kubernetes distros out there. You'll never hear from Rancher that our Kubernetes distro is better than an alternative, is fundamentally better than an alternative. I'll give a great example of it. If you get out to the cloud, if you're actually using Google Cloud or AWS, we'd encourage you to use GKE and EKS. Here there's a typo here. It should be GKE, AKS, and EKS. So those are obviously native Kubernetes services coming straight from 3 of the biggest clouds in the US. And the great thing about these cloud Kubernetes services is that not only you don't have to pay license for the software that is Kubernetes, but the cloud providers actually operate Kubernetes clusters for you. Now, that's not to say that Rancher can't add any value. So one of the things that Dave spent some time talking about was edge computing, and that's really taken off. And having a consistent Kubernetes platform that not only works in the data center and cloud, but also works on the edge is extremely attractive. And that explains the tremendous popularity of K3S, which was launched a year ago. So K3S added just enough packaging and tool set that actually made the Kubernetes that's proven in data center and cloud to work on Raspberry Pi, surveillance cameras, ATM machines, wind turbines. So it's taken off. And so you can see by believing in Kubernetes as the standard, by leveraging these cloud Kubernetes services, we're actually able to focus a lot of our attentions in areas that Kubernetes at the time wasn't particularly focused on. They're actually able to really push the industry forward. And that's basically a theme that we follow in our innovation roadmap. We like to do a set of work that really push the market forward. So one area Rancher really pioneered and still probably we are one of the few vendors really doing it wholeheartedly, is multi-cluster, multi-cloud, heterogeneous Kubernetes management. And Rancher has been doing it for years, and it's by far got the richest feature set. It's got the best experience, and it's got the widest adoption. So we're very proud of that. But beyond that, I've already mentioned K3S. Dave, I love Dave's slide about what does an enterprise Kubernetes platform look like, and he started with a developer experience, right? He called it almost like a modernized PaaS experience. That's exactly what we do with Project Rio, but that's not where we stop. In fact, Dave's point about you have Kubernetes have sort of the application eventually influencing how you do infrastructure. Nothing is more apparent than projects like Longhorn and Submariner. Both are projects created at Rancher. Longhorn now we've contributed to CNCF. Submariner, I think now is actually part of Kubernetes multi-cluster effort. So Longhorn does cloud native storage, and Submariner solves multi-cluster networking. So you can see all of our innovation has a flavor of actually adding value on top of Kubernetes, or sometimes like Longhorn and Submariner, you could imagine, even though it runs on top of Kubernetes, but it really enhances infrastructure functionality. So conceptually almost slides underneath Kubernetes. But all these things are built on the fact that we believe Kubernetes is the standard, and there's just a lot of value to add on top of, around, and underneath Kubernetes, the industry standard of Kubernetes. We really believe Kubernetes represents a much bigger story in computing than just container management. So if you kind of look at, how our whole industry has evolved, Dave said cloud computing is a 15-year-old industry already. It's kind of hard to believe that, but it's actually been that long. And it's got tremendous, 70% penetrated now. The growth rate is almost plateaued. So it succeeded. It's at the peak. But is it really the end all be all of everything? And if you think about it, there's actually one thing in that cloud has brought us that's actually not quite what I had expected, at least when I got started. Personally, I've been working in cloud computing for over 10 years, starting from my last company called Cloud.com. So I remember actually back in the data center days, even though things were more archaic, computing was actually more standardized. You could, if you wanted compute, you of course buy a computer, you buy a server, but there were a lot of choices. You buy Dell servers and HP servers and IBM servers. They had different brands. They differentiated in some way, but more or less they're compatible. You have a lot of choices, and not just servers, but storage. EMC, NetApp, Hitachi. They're not fundamentally different because they're speaking the industry standard protocols like SAN and NAS, same as networking, of course, but everything built on TCP/IP. But in the cloud, companies are now, in some sense, forced to take sides. It is in some sense a all or nothing kind of a value prop. If you truly wanted take advantage of all the latest and greatest technologies that each cloud provider is able to offer you. And of course, like I have on the right computing everywhere, that's just the reality. But there are also lots of places cloud can't go yet. I particularly like the picture on the right. That's actually from one of our customers called Goldwing. They're the second largest wind turbine manufacturer in the world. And these days, these wind turbines collect so much data that data about weather, about wind speed, about temperature. So they actually have to process all of that right there on the edge, because these wind turbines, as you know, are getting installed in very remote locations, and they use Kubernetes to do that. They use Rancher to manage that whole operation. So this is really quite remarkable. I really believe that Kubernetes could be the underpinning of computing everywhere, and that's why at Rancher we aspire to be the company that bring computing everywhere much easier, much more of an all or nothing kind of value prop, and make the IT agile transformation and workload portability a reality. So just like what great companies like VMware and Red Hat and AWS has done in data center and cloud space, and that is really our vision. When we started the company, we didn't want to. We were pretty sure, we were convinced we're gonna do. Back then, it was actually Kubernetes wasn't that big yet. Kubernetes was already kind of announced, but nobody other than very few of us actually believe is gonna be the next greatest thing. But we all knew containers was gonna be popular, but we didn't want to call our company Container Soft or Container Inc. We wanted to call our company Rancher, and all of us came from a cloud computing background. We all knew the pets versus cattle analogy, and we really believe, as much as we've progressed in cloud computing, the cloud resources, especially as it gets out to the edge, weren't really treated as cattle, as we had originally envisioned. So we want to leverage Kubernetes and containers as the technology underpinning and actually make this vision a reality. So I think we've come much closer, and we're definitely on the right side of the computing evolution, with the ever popular and ever more successul movement of Kubernetes. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Peter. He'll tell you just a little bit more about Rancher's product offerings before he hands it over to our customers. Just 1 second.
Thanks, Shen. Great. Okay, thanks. Excuse me. I hear a little echo. Oh, there we go. Hey, thank you, Shen, and also thank you, Dave. It's great to follow up with you guys. What I want to do now is sort of the next piece of the session. We'll shift gears a little bit and we've spent a fair amount of time now talking about what's happening in the market and the vision, what's happening with Kubernetes, the vision and the strategy that Rancher's employing as a company. Now, what I want to do is spend a few minutes talking about how that translates into our solution stack, taking things, getting into a more practical discussion. And so it's actually quite easy and quite straightforward to understand Rancher's cloud native solution stack. Shen talked about the fact that we have a portfolio of both commercial and open source projects, and they fit very neatly into what we call a kube cake, very simple 3-layer cake. And I want to explain that now because it speaks both to why we have the technology that we do, but it also speaks directly to our overarching strategy about running Kubernetes everywhere. And so when you look at this kube cake, it's really a tale in two, it's a story in two parts. The foundation of this is what you heard from both Dave and from Shen, which is this notion of Kubernetes as the core enabling technology for computing everywhere. And you also heard Shen talk about the fact that it's, our philosophy and our view of things is that it's not that one Kubernetes is better than somebody else's Kubernetes. It's about the fact that Kubernetes is a standard, and there are multiple certified distributions of Kubernetes that are purpose-built for different environments. So our philosophy and our approach is to embrace all of those, to promote the widespread deployment and distribution of Kubernetes everywhere it needs to go. So that's what that bottom layer is all about. And on the left in data center, you can see RKE. RKE is a Rancher's, on-prem distribution, but then as well in the middle there, you've got cloud, and we've got 3 examples of the major public cloud providers and their distributions. We treat those distributions as first-class citizens alongside RKE. And then on the right, you've got K3S. As Shen mentioned earlier, K3S is Rancher technology, open source technology, and it's really purpose-built. It's a very lightweight, very simple managed distribution of Kubernetes, ideal for edge-based workloads or branch or even dev and desktop type of environments, and it will continue to expand into new use cases. But the key message here is that bottom layer is very unlike sort of competitor bottom layers, which would have the same distribution everywhere, because their message would be use our distribution because our distribution is the best. Our philosophy and approach is use the distribution that is best suited for you. They're open source, they're easy to access. Dave talked about adoption earlier. Many organizations are using every single one of these distributions today. And it's because you have multiple departments with multiple different teams with different initiatives. It's simple to get started with GKE. It's simple to get started with EKS. I can spin it up essentially without asking anybody for anything. That's what's helping drive the adoption. So layer number 1 of this, of our Kube cake, is about treating all distributions, certified distributions, as first-class citizens, so that you can deploy and run Kubernetes, everywhere that you need to. That's part 1. In effect, you're creating a degree of sprawl, but that's okay, because the second layer of the cake is you've now enabled this computing everywhere. That's where Rancher comes into play. That second layer of the cake here is all about Rancher. Rancher is our flagship product, and that's all about centralized Kubernetes management, okay? And Rancher, the product, does a number of things very well and are the cornerstones of the product itself. The first one is what Dave mentioned at the top of the discussion: consistency. Consistency is an incredibly important word. You've got all these different distributions running in all these different places. You have to be able to manage them in a very simple and consistent way. That's the foundational capability of Rancher, the product. We enable you to have a consistent interface and a consistent operating experience, whether you're using RKE, whether you're using K3S out on the edge, whether you're running one or multiple clouds. So the operational piece of the puzzle is the foundation of Rancher. Second piece of the puzzle, and Dave said it very well, which is we absolutely believe that the security folks have got to be in, from day one. It's not an afterthought. So another foundational pillar of Rancher is global security and authentication. So providing that consistency and globalization and global visibility to security, global application and enforcement of security and authentication is a key pillar when you're widely deploying these clusters. The third piece as well is around common policy management. Back to the consistency. I'm running many different clusters. We see a future where people are going to be running hundreds and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of clusters. I've got to be able to apply policy in a consistent and common way across fleets of these different clusters. That's another core pillar of the platform. And then finally, and equally importantly, is our ecosystem catalog. And bear with me here a second. There we go. So this is also about consistency. I mean, we talk about the distributions, but as Kubernetes and containers are rapidly emerging within enterprises, there's a complete ecosystem that is growing up around Kubernetes, the distributions. These are all foundational components that, whether you're an IT operations organization, whether you're on the DevOps team, these are all pieces of the puzzle that fit into the building, the deployment, and the management of your containers with Kubernetes. And so the ecosystem catalog that Rancher provides very simple access to all of this open source and commercial innovation by providing a singular interface through the ecosystem catalog to have access to these different technologies, from networking and storage. You can see the variety there. Shen mentioned Longhorn as one of the options there. That's an open source. We donated that to the CNCF last year. But again, from bottom to top, these are all key technology pillars of your ability, key enablers for you to build, deploy, and manage your containers and your containerized applications at scale. And those are all, you have access to those directly through, in a consistent way, through the Rancher catalog. So actually, let me just finish with the top sort of layer of the cake. So we've talked about all the different distributions. We've talked about then that ability to tie them all together in a consistent operational way. When you're able to do that, the benefit then ties up to the two primary constituents and stakeholders that we serve, which are really the developers, who end up with the benefits of the ability. They get a very simplified DevOps experience because they get the ability to build, deploy, upgrade, and manage their applications. So they're given all the tools they need to go forth and prosper and build their applications and manage their applications, while at the same time, the IT operations teams get that central and global visibility and control, because it's that combination of allowing sprawl and federation and freedom for developers to go deploy those applications, while at the same time maintaining a degree of oversight and visibility. And that's things like defining clusters, being able to distribute those clusters, being able to enforce security, enforce policies, and so forth. You tie all those pieces together, you get this balance of freedom and flexibility and openness with central control and visibility. And that's really the unique value proposition of Rancher and our solution stack. So with that as a backdrop, now what I want to do is let's get really practical. What we'll do is I'm going to shift gears, and I want to turn the conversation over to Thomas, who is an IT infrastructure engineer at ABAX, one of our trusted customers, and appreciate you taking the time to be here. He's got a couple of slides that he's going to share about their experience with containers and Kubernetes and Rancher specifically. So let me turn the ball over to you, Thomas.
Thank you. Let's see
Stand
here.
by, going through the list. Yep, I'll be with you. It should be coming your way. Okay, should be with you.
Let's see here. So yeah, there we go. So I'm Thomas Ornell. I'm an IT infrastructure engineer at ABAX. I'm also heading up the Kubernetes initiatives that we're running inside the company, which also heavily involves me in our current cloud migration project, where we actually are moving all our deployments that used to be in production on-prem to Google Cloud. I worked from one of our satellite offices in Bergen, Norway. After a little while, I was moved to Nantong in China to see if I could figure out some of the technical challenges we had there. And I'm currently based in our head office in Larvik, Norway as well. So ABAX is one of the leading telematics providers in Northern Europe. We're the fastest growing one. Currently, we have about 250,000 active subscriptions that provides us with location data on vehicles or industrial equipment. So yeah, we had a challenging start when it comes to Kubernetes. Some of the main challenges here were mainly that there was an unclear ownership relationship between IT and development. There was no real strategy when it came down to cloud, or more specifically, which cloud we're using. That's practically led to us having a presence in all clouds, basically, as well as on-prem. So let's put it this way. We are currently using most of the ways to deploy things in Kubernetes through Rancher. We also had an attempt, that was before I moved back from China, to do DOI clusters ourselves, which in my experience is a very bad idea. And we arrived at the point where the trust in our self-provisioned clusters were so low that we decided to find a provider that could both simplify the deployment process on clusters and provide us with support for those clusters. And one of the things we usually hear is, doesn't Google or Azure provide proper support for your clusters if you provision them there? One of the things we've experienced quite the harsh way is the fact that when we use support from, let's say, Google or Azure, we end up with the answer, yeah, Kubernetes is online, so this must be something on your end. That has luckily not been the experience we've had with Rancher. And one of the other main things that was in our list here of requirements was the fact that we needed to function both in the cloud and on-prem, which led us to mainly finding one supplier here, which was Rancher. You mentioned earlier, Dave, the top challenges. I think we've experienced pretty much all 6 of them, which is not a good place to be, to put it mildly. So this is more on where we are currently. And I'm working close with pretty much all of our dev teams, where we need to improve the way we deploy things and how we do staging and QA and stuff like that. So a current environment for us today is 3 application VMs with Windows, 2 with Linux, 2 database servers, and deploying 49 services in there, or 49 plus. The way it's been done traditionally, that means 14 to 20 days if you're optimistic on deployment time. And that's with 2 people. So when you get this ticket, that's basically saying we need a second staging environment and we need it yesterday. You have a challenge. Because now, for our DevOps team, that would mean that if you want this done, either half of the team is busy with this, or the best people in the team are busy with this, and either way, you get very little done for a while. So when you're in a situation where you basically locked up all your personnel, and this is the situation we were in a couple of months ago, is what the hell do you do? And we couldn't really say that we can do this because we know that the next team will ask for the same thing, and then you're basically stuck in deploying staging environments for the rest of your life. So we decided to take another route. We told the teams that you will have to wait, but we're working on it. And then we started to automate. And we pretty much automated everything. We had a discussion internally, and we decided on moving away from the standard Helm implementation of deploying things in Kubernetes. And we actually decided to go for deploying it through Rancher, both through the Rancher command line tools, which we used in our CD pipeline, and actually give QA their own opportunity to deploy things through the Rancher interface. So if you do things right there, and I hope you can see the right screen. Yeah, you can. I'm going to zoom a bit in. So for our QA guys, they can do it like this. Launch, select your plug, which is our main product. They choose a namespace. They can overwrite all settings we have in our environment. And when they're done, they can press launch. The ETA on this one is 10 to 15 minutes for a complete environment. And this is just getting started from our perspective. We're actually also playing around with Rio now, looking into that to get a more consistent testing environment for our developers as well. But yeah, that's what we're doing currently at ABAX. Yeah, over to you, Pete.
Thomas, that was great. Thank you. You couldn't speak more directly to the notion of agility, and and how containers and Kubernetes have enabled you to do that. Really, really cool stuff. And again, always grateful for your trust in Rancher as your vendor. So look forward to an ongoing collaboration. So more exciting stuff to come. All right, so now let's shift gears. Zach, we're not going to use slides. You and I are just gonna chat a little bit. That's a tough act to follow, though, Thomas. That was pretty cool stuff. So, but Zach, you've got your company right off the bat. You guys are doing some really interesting. Just the company itself is in a very interesting space. So, just sort of starting things off, can you give us just a little flavor of yourself, the company, what you guys do? Let's just sort of start there.
Yeah, so my name's Zach Dunn, as you can see. I'm the Senior Director of Platform Operations and CISO for a company called Optoro. Basically, my role at the company is caring about blinky lights and making sure blinky lights don't get stolen, and then figuring out how we can use blinky lights to power this platform. The platform we've built is about eliminating waste from sort of the return and excess inventory of retailers. Just really high level, retailers are amazing at forward logistics. And so that's when someone buys 1,000 iPhones, they know they're all new, they know they need to get them to customers' hands. That is a well-oiled machine that is very, very old science. The truth is, though, is especially with e-commerce has taken on, think of Zappos, think of all these large companies who do just a huge amount of e-commerce. The return rate in e-commerce versus brick and mortar, you're talking 20, 25%. Some are higher than that. And those come in and it's onesie twosies, maybe it's used, maybe it's in its packaging, maybe whatever. And really what happens is there hasn't been a good playbook for that. And so it gets touched, that costs money. It gets shipped, that costs money. And it's a carbon footprint issue as well. These things go back and eventually, you know, in 6 months, if you bought an iPhone, you returned it and then it gets shipped around 6 or 9 times. First off, the thing's lost a huge amount of value. Who wants an iPhone 7? It's trash, clearly. And so like, so what ends up happening is maybe it gets eBay, maybe someone honestly just parts it out. Honestly, a lot of times the stuff just gets thrown out. So we work with customers to remove those touches. And so we can be inside of storefronts, we can be in their warehouses, they could be sending us direct drop returns. We then immediately will help them manage those returns and excess inventory, however makes sense for the client. So a lot of times they'll be using our platform to do what we call re-commerce. So we put them simultaneously on Amazon, eBay, our own brands, our blink.com and bulk.com. And people can come and purchase those things, and we get those turned back out into the market much more quickly. And the advantage there is we're huge carbon footprint reduction, and honestly, it helps retailers really take get a better return on their value.
Got it. That's awesome. I just think that's a fascinating. It's efficiency. We're reducing waste. I just think it's good to believe in what you're doing. So tell us a little bit more now, then, in terms of shift to technology. You know, how does that translate into what you're doing from technology, containers, Kubernetes, that kind of thing? Yeah.
So for us, in a funny way, we're a 10-year-old company. So we're not a really flashy startup. We're still a startup, but we've been doing this for a while, and we actually started off in Amazon in EC2, and not like VPCs and all that, just straight up EC2 instances with public addresses. Here's my Redis server. Oops, let's make sure it's not on the internet. Sort of world to Amazon and VPCs. And then we actually did this migration into our own data centers, which I know sounds backwards, but we can talk about it if you want. But a lot of it really has hinged around, we followed this very similar trajectory of, we started off and it was basically get some code onto a server. Then it was, okay, let's get our monolith into some sort of like the Chef, Terraform, let's something. We're very much in the same position. I think Thomas was talking about with, hey, if you want a staging environment, it takes 15 days. That was that was us too. It's like I have to create a new VPC, I have to match that up into Terraform modules. Let me get all the stuff in. And so as we've done this migration, one of the things that happened on the way to the market was we ended up running on a platform called Joyent Smart Data Center. That was on premise. They also had a cloud before Samsung bought them, and Samsung decided they would prefer to have them as their internal cloud. And what happened was they had a Docker interface. And so, fun fact, Docker is just an HTTP API running on your local machine. And so the guys at Joyent said, well, we can hijack that. So what they did was they took that HTTP interface, put it on the data center, and so when you did a Docker run, it just scheduled it on the entire platform. So immediately, what we started doing was Dockerizing a lot of our stuff. So we moved from Chef and Terraform to just sort of Terraform with Dockers and build pipelines. And then all of a sudden, we realized we'd kind of been managing our own platform. We'd built a PaaS when we thought we were using IIS. And then we started saying, well, if we're just going to mimic a PaaS, why don't we embrace a PaaS? And we started looking around, and we realized what we'd basically done is tried to build a Kubernetes. And that's when we were like, you know what, we can really gain a lot of momentum and flexibility from embracing the market that's out there with Kubernetes.
Got it. And then so from there, sort of how'd your what did the landscape look like? What was sort of your journey down from an evaluation deployment standpoint? What did that look like?
Yeah, so originally when we moved into our data center, we did sort of like look at the world. And honestly, if you had asked me at the time, and this would have been, I'd say 2015, Mesosphere was really big, right? Like everyone was talking about Mesosphere, and that was the big thing. And I don't know anybody who's running DCOS right now, or adopting it at this point. And we looked at Kubernetes, and Kubernetes at the time was like, as long as you're running completely stateless applications, we're cool. And it was like, well, wait a minute, I get paid for data, right? Like our customers need insights. They need we have to collect that data. We have to know the state of something to know where's that iPhone exactly? What shelf? What's its SKU? How do I get it back out to a customer? All of that. So the fact that it kind of wasn't ready for prime time for state kind of made us set it on the side. And so when we went back out to the market, one of the things we kind of looked around and said is like, well, we've got a little bit of catch up to do, but realistically, one of the things we couldn't throw away was the fact that we had made a substantial investment in running our own hardware. And if we were to sort of adopt the cloud full scale again, I'm sorry, when I say cloud, I mean someone else's hardware, we'd be doubling our run rate. And that one of our reasons for moving onto our own hardware was because it was so much cheaper. So what we ended up saying was, okay, well, we need to know how to do this. We want to be able to do it in our own facility because that's what made sense to us. And we started playing around and realizing I think again, like when Thomas was talking about DYI clusters, that really struck home because it's not that it's impossible to manage these clusters by yourself. And I don't think anyone should really buy sort of the FUD around the idea that Kubernetes is impossible to manage. But the consistency in management across environments is just hugely important. And that's where we stumbled into Rancher. And we were like, this makes a lot of sense to us.
Got it. Cool. And just if you would, just a little bit more then your thoughts on kind of what your Rancher deployment looks like and just maybe some of the benefits or sort of, that you're seeing and maybe where you're going a little bit, a little bit leaning forward too.
Yeah, so one of the things we've really been able to do is we've actually been able to separate out sort of our blast zones, right? So when we were running our own stack inside of our own platform originally, we kind of had one large pool of servers we were dealing with, right? And that included our management plane. This, of course, introduced sort of the operational issue of like, if I'm managing my management plane with the same thing that makes my money, I can't affect too much change there. And I'm really kind of crippling myself a little bit when it comes to velocity. So what we started to do was with Rancher, we run that in a separate cluster. Now we can say, okay, production is going to be over here. Okay, now stage is going to be over here. Let's have a dev cluster. Let's have a CI cluster. Let's tear those up and rebuild them. And so what we're starting to look a lot more like is our clusters are much closer tied to where they run in the world and what's basically SLA they're running against. So we have prod cluster, and non-prod. Everyone hates this term, by the way. I think it's hilarious because it tells you exactly what the value of it. It doesn't pay my mortgage. It's not production. Do whatever you want there. We have another one called testing. Guess what you can do there? Test. So we end up in this world where we get to build clusters that are slightly more specific for the task at hand. And again, we're starting to kind of, in my real view of the world is like a lot of people who are coming into Kubernetes and these platforms now are looking around and going, well, yeah, of course I can kind of do multi-cloud and you can scale across these environments and I can get partial resources. What's the big deal? I think that's where we all thought we were going to be with Web 1.0 or Cloud 1.0, right? Is that like I can sign up for a cloud provider and if I can dynamically scale this stuff and I'll get port. And that just turned out not to be true, right? I don't know anyone who successfully was able to really do utility computing in sort of the original cloud platforms. And where we've really gotten to is we are doing utility computing. We're able to spin up on GKE. We're able to spin up on Packet. We're able to spin up on Amazon, and we're able to take advantage of those sites or just rip them down. And so for us, we've really gotten to be able to be an on-prem hybrid multi-cloud platform. And as we go forward, what this has meant is we've got Rancher as the single point of entry. So when our devs are doing anything or we're setting up a new technology, it's always the same thing. You go through Rancher, go through that Rancher portal, use the Kubernetes API, it's Rancher. and we know that's scoped. I care a lot about that because as the CISO, I have to care a lot about that. So for me, it's super important that I know that our backed entry point is secure. And it's honestly, if you don't know where people are coming in, you don't know what to monitor. So having that sort of single entry point meant that now we can really start to experiment behind it. So as we're moving forward, we're looking around and saying we need more visibility here, and we can do that. We can iterate in that one spot. And as we're expanding our clusters, we're able to start taking those steps into, giving our quality engineers the ability to spin up an entire environment in 5 minutes. And, just like Thomas was saying, we had these long running stage environments and they would stick around forever and everyone was attached to them. They're just like, that's how I get my job done. And it was this very typical Stockholm syndrome. And eventually I blew it away last week and everyone was been just, oh, we can't do that. I'm not gonna be able to do my job. And they're able to do their job because they can spin it up in our dev cluster in 5 minutes. They have seed data. They can blow the whole thing away, bring in a new branch, test all again with that data. And all of a sudden, it's like you show them, especially like the quality engineers, and their eyes just open. They're like, this is amazing. I have repeatable baselines. I can know when I go from one tier to another that this is something that I can trust. And it removes a huge amount of resistance from the SDLC. You can have this beautiful little, snake eating its own tail of SDLC, and everyone's going to pat you on the back. But the truth is, the way we need to look at that SDLC is how cleanly does it flow? Because if you're getting stuck in QA, and really your QA is just everybody sitting around and poking at something for 12 hours and then kind of shrugging, you're not doing it right. If you know that when you go through QA, that you're pushing those same changes into whatever your next environment is, maybe it's prod, that's hugely important. Because right now what's happening in a lot of industries, and honestly what's happening in ours, is we're looking at it, we were doing all the right things we could with the tools we had, but at a certain point you were trusting to that quality engineer and those dev teams to their guts that this was probably going to work.
Right.
And
right.
Not to say we've ever been, sort of drunk and disorderly with our customers, but now we've raised that bar even further, and we know by pushing out artifacts, by pushing all those configurations through in our CI/CD platforms, we know that we're delivering the exact same product from one environment to another environment to another environment, and just being able to
consistency again.
Yeah, it's consistency, and again, like that's what Kubernetes has really been for us. Is it's this universal API. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing is using Rancher to manage that universal API. Yeah. And then we just hook into it. And we just hook into it time and time again. And I think the real upside of this is like, now we're really starting to be in that position where the Cloud 2.0 realities of utility computing are really starting to bubble up, right? Now we're looking around and we can say, hey, I want to go into Europe. Okay, who's got the cheapest rates? Who's in the places we need to be? Who has the configurations we need. It's no longer, well, I'm an Amazon shop, I don't have any choice, I'm going into Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Great example of sort of computing everywhere. I appreciate that. Thank you, Zach. Good discussion. And I think we're gonna finish up by comparing a couple different sort of taking a step back and looking at the sort of the overall landscape of sort of different ways of approaching Kubernetes management. I think I've heard a number of consistent themes here, and they're really around, ultimately it's around agility, but then it's also around this notion of being able to take computing wherever it needs to go, doing that in a very agile and consistent way. And I think the last thing we want to talk about now is sort of what I've also heard from both Zach and Thomas is the way that you decide, the decisions you make about your approach to Kubernetes management are incredibly important. And so what I want to now talk about, sort of closing, we've got about 8-9 minutes left, is that I want to spend a few minutes talking about the way the market is unfolding. Is there's really two primary buckets of strategic approaches to Kubernetes management, and I want to sort of compare and contrast those, because the decisions you make about that will have long-standing effects for you from a company standpoint. So on the left, you have what we would consider to be legacy approaches. Okay, this is represented here by IBM and Red Hat, as well as VMware. And really, you know, there's some consistency here. If you look at these at a high level in terms of their stack, there's some consistency here in the sense that it's VMware in the bottom, VMware in the middle, VMware at the top. You know, Red Hat at the bottom, OpenShift in the middle, OpenShift at the top. So it's a very monolithic approach, if you will. There's some consistency to that, but it's very vertically integrated. It's a very heavy stack. Okay, and so there's some questions that you want to ask, and you want to be double clicking into things you want to be looking out for, sort of potential pitfalls of going down the path of applying a legacy approach, if you will, to Kubernetes management. And some of the things you should be thinking about that we'd ask you to think about is, you know, number one, are you compromising your agility with legacy technology? Okay, and what I mean by that agility is, you know, we're talking about at the top of the hour, the consistent theme here was it's not about any one particular Kubernetes being any better than anybody else's. Okay, in this model, you know, you can have any color you want as long as it's, you know, as long as it's black type of thing. So are you compromising your agility because you have to, are you going to be running heavy vSphere stacks, you know, anywhere you need computing to go? So something to think about is, are you compromising that agility? Just like Zach and Thomas were really just talking about. I want to go into Europe. Okay, well, if I want to go into Europe, then I may spin up an instance of XYZ wherever I want it to be. That's very different than I want to go into Europe. I need to spin up a heavy stack on infrastructure that I have to deploy, you know, wherever I'm going. So that's number one. You know, number two is, you know, do you really, we caution you about, you know, be very careful about where you make decisions about locking yourself into any particular technology. You know, certainly from the rancher perspective, you don't want to be locked into anything. Certainly we are anti-locking overall. But you want to be careful in the legacy environments that you know, are you locking yourself in at the infrastructure level? Are you locking yourself in at the distribution level? Are you locking yourself in at a particular management stack? Something to think about. You know, another thing to think about is, are you limiting your options in terms of innovation? You know, I've got some examples here around multi-cloud networking storage. There's, you know, some would argue the benefit of vertically integrated stack is, you know, you get everything that you need. And there may be some benefits to that, certain customers, that's fine. But at the same time, you want to ask yourself, are you limiting potentially some of your options around that ecosystem innovation and technology that we were touching on before with the overall stack? Another thing to absolutely think about is the notion of, are you paying for things that you don't need? There is a lot of technology debt, you know, with legacy stacks. You know, in this particular example, there's $40 billion of technology debt there. So from a pricing and software and bundling and licensing standpoint, you at least need to be asking the question, what am I exactly paying for? What is in that stack? What am I actually using versus what potentially is sitting on the shelf? You know, what is that underlying licensing thing? You know, our view is that licensing should not be an architectural discussion. Licensing should just enable you to get what you need. So something to be thinking about. And then ultimately, it does beg the question. These are both very reputable, you know, companies, but do you want to trust essentially legacy vendors with your cloud native transformation? Okay, it's an important question to ask. Where's the world going? This is not where the world was, this is where the world's going, and it's all about cloud native. And it's an important question to ask. So that's something, again, there are people that will go down this path, and that's completely fine, but we wanted to level those questions out there for people to be thinking about. Now I'd like to contrast that briefly with what we'd call a ranch, you know, the cloud native stack, okay, as represented here by Rancher. So at the bottom of that stack, it's ultimately about complete flexibility of any operating system that you want to be using. You heard Thomas talk about they've got Linux, they've got Windows. Zach was talking about Linux. You've talked about multiple operating environments, multiple operating systems. Let your developers use whatever the operating systems are and the environments within which they need to run. It's completely open. You want to use Red Hat, you want to use RHEL, that's okay by us. You want to use CentOS instead of Ubuntu, it doesn't matter. You want to use Amazon Linux, it doesn't matter. The point is, use the operating system that is best suited for the environment that you're running. It's all about that flexibility. Second piece of the puzzle is it's about agility. And it's about agility to leverage any cloud native infrastructure, whether you're running on-prem, whether you're running in one or multiple clouds, whether you're running out on the edge. It's about the ability and the agility to leverage any of those cloud native infrastructures, enable that sprawl in a very agile and cost-effective way. And then ultimately, it's about providing an open source approach to give you that global visibility and control that you're looking for and that you desire, that we've been talking about through the course of the hour. So I think there's a very simple way, you know, compare and contrast, pretty stark delta between those two. And when you really net it out, we see the world like this, okay? On the right, you have a very open, flexible, and agile environment, largely driven by open source technology and innovation. On the left, what you've got is fundamentally, an infrastructure that's not agile, that's largely monolithic. It's largely driven by proprietary software. You're running a high risk of locking yourself into certain technologies, and you're potentially paying for software that you don't need, or you're paying more for software that you're using. And in many cases, you're seeing spiraling costs that can be 10, 20 times what you'd see running a true cloud native stack. So again, different courses, for different horses for different courses. And this happens to be the way we see the world, and it begs you to be asking the questions, to be sort of looking at these two different camps as you're going down your path of Kubernetes strategy. With that sort of ends the formal part of the presentation. Wanted to leave you with a couple of outlets to continue the conversation and to learn more. So we have an event coming up on the 15th of April, which is all about our recent 2.4 launch. So we'll have a hands-on event, hands-on with 2.4, which will be on April 15th. You can learn all about our latest Rancher 2.4 release. Second thing is, if you're interested in learning more about strategy, you can download our Kubernetes strategy white paper that's available on our web. So you can also visit us at rancher.com. And then as well, we're an open source company. We're all about driving adoption and driving a larger community for all of us, not just Rancher, but just driving the overall Kubernetes landscape and community. So we encourage everyone to join the community in any number of the different ways you can, whether it be forum, Slack, or GitHub. So with that, we're right up on time, so I want to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time. We've covered a lot of ground. I would like to thank all of my colleagues for taking the time to present. Dave, thank you. Shannon, appreciate that. Thomas, thank you. Zach, appreciate your time. I thought this was I hope that everyone that's listening in found this to be beneficial and insightful. Ultimately, Rancher, a core part of Rancher's DNA is really just sharing thoughts and insight and promoting community. That's what we stand for, and it's part of who we are. So hopefully you've learned something from this. We love sharing this information and look forward to continuing the conversations. And in the meantime, given the extraordinary days within which we're living, we appreciate everyone's time and wish everyone nothing but health and safety as we work through everything. So with that, appreciate everyone's time. Have a great morning, great day, great evening. Thanks very much for your time. Take care.